Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Devops.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap today. I'm really excited about this one. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on demand. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for four $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. Okay, with that now, Andreas, you can move your slide. Let's get on with today's webinar, which is Future-Proof Your Digital Transformation. Our speaker today is Andreas Prins, who is the VP of Platform Strategy at Digital.ai. Andreas, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about this particular topic.
Thank you so much. I'm likewise excited to share a lot of experiences and a lot of knowledge from my past career, my previous jobs that I've had, but more important, to share stories from companies all around the world that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And
Excellent.
this story today...
Sorry, I was just going to say I'm going to put myself on mute, take myself off camera, and let you get right to it.
Yeah, enjoy. So what is really important is many companies, they start with the automation. And when they start with the automation, it's most obvious that they start at the team level. And this is important. But what we want to tackle today in this webinar is really what is required to go beyond the first day, to go beyond the first cycles of improvement. And today I want to share a lot of instruments and a lot of tips and tricks that you can take with you to ultimately enlarge and further work in your digital transformation. And one of the first things, let's start with the automation, right? Because if we talk about a digital transformation, and we are here with Devops.com, we all know that there's an entire landscape out with a lot of tools. And some of you might be familiar with the periodic table. If not, there's a 4th version out today, which is listing a lot of the modern tools that are used in many large enterprises. And as you can see, the entire DevOps space, right, covering the different practices as seen here in the periodic table, the DevOps space is huge. And that is interesting, right? Because that is keeping us busy day in, day out, while driving towards a more digital organization. I don't want to go into depth in a single tool or in a single segment today in this webinar. Why? Because I do believe that there's much more beyond the single tools and the single automation. Today, I want to take you in a journey which starts at the team level, is moving up to a business line, and ultimately is helping large enterprises to transform. And that's not only engineering or operations that is involved. That includes management and even executives to truly start transforming a company top down and bottom up. And what I've seen in many of the transformations is that a lot of the effort and the main energy is being pushed into the teams, changing culture, changing how way people work, changing technology. And this is good, this is great. But if you don't take the value, why are we doing things, into account, I do believe you're kind of lost. Because to what purpose, into what direction are you improving your organization? And by taking the purpose, the value into account, you can much better align your teams. But now the funny thing is, how much effort do we actually put into the other layers? How much effort do we take to align the work for the teams with what the business line needs, or even what the enterprise needs? Or if you do that the other way around, how well is the value or the goals that we set as a large enterprise or as a company cascading down to a business line, all the way down to a team, or even towards a team member? And I do believe this is important. And this is important for the practices. How do we align practices to speed up? Also for the technology, are we utilizing more or less the same technology or the same thinking on each and every level? And last but not least, what I do believe is really, really important is to focus on the value. Do we actually know how the value is articulated at the highest level and what we can do as a team to contribute to this? Or the other way around, is the work that I'm doing meaningful for the larger company that I'm working for? Or does it have an impact on my customers? And what I want to do today in this webinar is give you a few directions, a few thought patterns that you can take and truly use tomorrow or the day after to start aligning whatever you're doing. Because I do believe that if you've covered your team, your practices, and the technology, there's so much to achieve to truly let your company accelerate. And that is required to build digital experiences for your customers. So let's dive a little deeper. The first thing is beyond the dream, right? Because we all know that a digital transformation often starts with a dream on the positive side, or it starts with the black swan, an event that is happening in your situation, in your company, that is disrupting the existing way of working. And I do believe that COVID-19 is one of these black swans that is truly disrupting many of our businesses. So beyond the black swan or beyond the dream, what are the instruments that you can use to start planning out your digital transformation? And I want to share today an instrument which is called an Explorer map. And an Explorer map, and you can find the source down at the page. An Explorer map is an instrument to come together, whether or not you do it in the digital way using visual whiteboarding or digital whiteboarding, or you physically come together in a few months. But it is an instrument to start sharing the goals that you want to achieve. What is the really big goal that I want to achieve with my company, with my business line, or even with my teams? And let's stick to the level of a business line. What is it, for example, for my insurance business line, or my telco, or my mortgage? What is the big goal that I want to achieve in, let's say, a year from now? And while you're discussing with the management team and with your seniors in your department, you can articulate that big goal that you want to achieve. And then the question is, if you've articulated your dream and you can describe how it looks like in a year from now, what are then the next goals that you need to take first before you can achieve the big goal? And an Explorer map is a really, really powerful instrument to start having this conversation. And I'll promise you, having these conversations on a quarterly basis will take you around 2 days each. And you might wonder, that's too long, I cannot free up this time. But it tremendously helps you to articulate what you want to achieve, the goals in between, as well as the actions that are leading towards this. And the beauty of having this conversation and then putting it on the wall, visually or digitally, will help you on a day-to-day basis to understand what was the goal that I want to achieve. And myself, I've had a lot of experiences with this. We did it on a quarterly basis, and it's really, really powerful to start doing because it helps you to share the goal, it helps you to align on how to achieve it, and it is a visual token that you can go back to and you remember the conversation that you've had. So the Explorer map is a really powerful instrument, amongst others, but a really powerful instrument to start planning your journey and to start moving. Because the automation is fine, remember, but what are the bigger goals? What are the harder problems to tackle? What are the obstacles that you need to overcome? And this can help you to identify what is needed. But that's just the start. Remember, we do this every quarter, every half year, we come together, we articulate what we want to do. And then the second question is, I do believe, how do you as a leadership team, as a management team, how do you guide the digital transformation on a day-to-day basis? And I do believe that in today's world, with all the data that is at their fingertips, remember, from all the Devops tools, the planning tools, we need to start utilizing this data to make decisions and to drive decisions. And what I've learned is that coming together as a management team, it is really powerful to do that in your visual room. And again, no matter if it's COVID time or if you're physically together, what are the visualizations that you can use and want to use to understand where you are and how you're progressing in your journey. And I've learned that an Obeya room can be extremely helpful to manage easily teams up to 300 people, to really have the details there of everything that's going on, to make decisions and to help the teams moving forward. And if you go with me through the room for a little moment, imagine this is a room of 4 by 4 square meter or 4 by 5. You do see at the board at the top left the long-term plan. And this is the Explorer map that we just touched upon in the previous slide. And then the interesting thing, a transformation only happens if you take actions on a day-to-day basis. And that is what is listed on the week board. What is the step, what is the next goal that we want to achieve in this week? And you as a management team or you as a lead start articulating the actions you need to take with your teams to start moving into that direction. And coming together on a daily basis in this room or as a management team at your Kanban board to discuss what needs to happen is required. Because you not only need to take action, you also need to solve the impediments. And that's the last one at the top. And this is truly focused to keep the ball rolling and keep the transformation going on. And then if you take a look at the bottom, what we'll see there is a highly data-driven overview. You can see all the charts that cover illness, that cover holiday, that cover expenses, that cover all the elements that need to have your attention. What we've learned is that you can put thresholds in there. So as soon as you reach a particular threshold, it will be marked as red, and then it requires your attention. So it is a really powerful way to have all the metrics out there and only take action whenever it is required. So when building this room and thinking about it, you need to articulate what matters to me as a leadership team in this digital transformation to take actions on. And what we've learned as well is that if you're not progressing on your strategic goals, you need to raise a flag, because most likely there are difficult impediments that you need to tackle. The risk, operational risk, IT risk, whatever type of risk you have in your organization, it can even be backlog execution risk or project risk, list it on the board, make it visual, and discuss it whenever it reaches a particular threshold. And then really important, what I want to call out there as well is what we've called the Lifecycle Management Board. How are you progressing in the journey with regards to your entire application landscape? And in the previous webinar, I don't know if you were there, but in the previous webinar, we touched upon the simplification of your landscape. Feel free to watch the recording about that one, because understanding how to simplify is crucial in the digital transformation. And then last but not least, absolutely spend time on a weekly basis talking about your successes and your failures, because this is critical in moving forward. This helps you to open up and to become more vulnerable. And I believe that people aspect, the soft side of the transformation, is really important to achieve great success. So to recap, if we've set the goals with the Explorer map, the next layer, an Obeya room, can be of great value to manage groups of people from 50, 100, 300, and even higher if you need to manage this transformation at scale. And then I want to go one step deeper, because all of us are super familiar with team backlogs, whether or not you're using version 1, Jira, or Azure Devops. But what is important is that the backlog itself is just one piece of the puzzle. I do believe all teams, no matter what type of software they're developing or what practice they're executing, they need to make use of a visual board where they see the work that needs to happen, but that is accompanied with two sides. The first one, what is important, is to understand the bigger picture. Remember the transformation plan we want to go to, but also remember the first slide where we talked about cascading value down. If you can provide your teams the ability to understand where they are contributing to, that is of great value to help them make better decisions in that larger picture. And then also listing the top of the backlog. What is the target architecture that I want to achieve? What are the long-term ongoing projects? What about my risk and all these kind of capabilities? If you make them visual, it will be helpful for the teams to make better decisions. And you might ask, Why is this important? I personally do believe that if you give teams, if you want to make your teams more autonomous, you need to set the guardrails within they can make the decisions. And I believe that we have so much data today available to make these decisions. This is really important. And then last but not least, utilizing historic data to drive improvement is really important. So what we see now is that an Explorer map can be helpful to manage the long-term plan. An Obeya at a larger scale, managing the transition on a day-to-day basis. And then the teams board that is well aligned with the goals and whatever you want to achieve to really execute on a day-to-day basis. And that is a beautiful way of cascading down what needs to happen. Why is that the case? Because now all of a sudden the value that is expressed that need to be achieved at the highest level is cascading down all the way towards an engineer to make decisions and to contribute. And therefore, value delivery is rolling up from all the teams towards a business line and even towards a company. So these instruments can be of great help to start planning that journey. And then in the second section, I really wanted to spend a few words on design for scale. I do believe that if you want to go beyond automation, organizations need to take into account the word scale. And scale, to me, has many aspects. But if we focus on skills and technology, I do think you need to be prepared and you need to build a setup that is highly scalable. Why? Because otherwise there will be copies of copies and copies of copies. Otherwise, we're introducing so much waste that ultimately we're spending more time on the automation tools than on automating the value creation, which is the goal of our digital transformation. And the first thing is, I've mentioned it already, how do we scale from one team towards many teams? That's one side of the house. And at the same time, how do we build autonomy within the boundaries of control? I've worked myself at one of the larger banks here in Europe, and I know how important it is to have control. Control about your delivery process with change management controls, control of your operational risk. Are all my checks and balances in place, SOX compliance, and all these kind of rules, auditing. So what I really like to think about is what is the framework that you can build as an organization that is setting the guardrails and at the same time providing a lot of freedom for the teams. That is an important thing to do. And then the second element there is how do you scale the skills of a particular engineer? And in particular, today, with the big movement towards cloud and containers, not everyone can become a Kubernetes engineer. So what are the mechanisms in place that the few rock stars are utilized not to push one application, but to push an entire discipline out for your organization? How can you use your knowledge and skills to start scaling out with particular practices? And I believe that that is important. And the second level, for example, blueprints, really setting up structures can be of great help, but also selecting a few tools that can help you driving this forward. I don't believe that every team should have the ability to choose its own tools. That is important if you are transforming into a new era. If you're moving from the more on-prem development, monolithic, towards cloud and microservices, that is absolutely a phase where you need to do a little pioneering, that you understand what are the tools that are out there and are best suitable to solve my problem. But as soon as you start moving it on towards rolling out to many teams, I believe you need to make decisions and start building the framework to accelerate all the other teams. So scaling is important from a skill perspective and from a tool perspective. The other one I do think we can reconsider is how can we make, for example, for security, a standard set of building blocks that can be reused by many of the teams. Recently, I had a conversation with one of our customers in the UK, and they were trying to find the balance between saying this is the mandatory pipeline you need to go through, and at the same time having the freedom for the teams to select and pick their own tools. And during that conversation, She was explaining how they articulated 5 stages where every application and every deployment and release was forced to go through. And on each stage, they were listing what was the outcome or the output of each stage. But then the teams, and that is, I do believe, really beautiful, had the freedom to enhance it with their own tools. So the forced mandatory piece was really lightweight, but they could enrich it for quality or for even more security that they would love to see. And why is this helpful? Because all of a sudden, you are harvesting all the data that is required, for example, for your audit reports. Why is that useful? Because all of a sudden, you have kind of a central view of who's doing what. Who's pushing which application at what point in time to a particular environment? Not even talking about not being able to push a production app from your command line to the cloud, but having it in a central managed process. But what we said as well is we need to give the freedom within the stages for teams to pick and choose whatever they like. So if you're considering to start scaling out a new technology, think about it twice. Ask yourself the question, what if I want to scale it out to 100 teams? What is required to build a repeatable pattern? And what we see in many of our customers is they start talking about DevOps as a service. And I do think the principle of DevOps as a service, the mechanism, is a really powerful one. And no matter if you choose these 4 elements as a way to make DevOps consumption-based to scale it out. But think about it, what is it that I need to provide as a service, which is commoditized, so every team member can utilize it, which is freeing up time for 2 things. First of all, new feature development, value creation, and at the same time, it's freeing up time for process improvement and practice improvement. And the 4 elements that are listed here are what we see at many of our customers that want to go wide and want to scale it out to hundreds and thousands of DevOps teams and the multitude of engineers. So take that DevOps as a service thinking and it's consumption based. And I do think it's a kind of funny, and you can agree or disagree with me, but it's a kind of funny that in the application components that we are choosing to build our applications, we are heavily depending on libraries or even SaaS components. But if it comes to our own DevOps practices, we're still inventing it almost from a team-by-team basis. So DevOps as a service thinking can be helpful. And again, why? Because we free up time for value creation and for process improvement. And if you start doing so, it will become stronger and stronger, and more value will be created ultimately for the end customer. So that is about scale building for scaling it out and go beyond the first few teams. We've touched upon scaling the knowledge. We've touched upon scaling practices. And we also can think about DevOps as a service that will be helpful to spread the love to all your teams. And then in the next section, what I also would love to share is how do we actually define value and how do we measure value? And I do think what is a really, really good and strong movement is that a lot of decision making is being pushed down or given away towards the teams, towards product owners and product managers. Instead of writing very extensive project plans stretching over a timeline of 2 or 3 years, we now have built fast feedback cycles. We show it, we share it, we deploy it, we use it. But the question is, how do we align what we're doing with what we want to achieve as an organization? Explorer maps, what we've covered in the beginning, can be helpful, is a helpful instrument to articulate the goals you want to achieve from a transformational perspective. But what are the instruments that you can use to start planning out the work from a value perspective? And I do think a simple instrument like impact mapping can be of great value to understand what you want to achieve. And why is this useful? Because imagine you cannot yet operate in isolation. You're not working for an extreme small startup where there's just one team. What we all know is that many of us work in companies where work needs to come together from 2 teams, 5 teams, 20 teams, or even 100 teams that are all contributing to the same goal. Impact mapping, I believe, for product managers and product owners or business line managers is a really powerful instrument to start understanding what do I want to achieve from a business perspective or from a customer's perspective, and then start understanding who is involved, who needs to be involved to make this change reality, and then start understanding what is the impact, what is the stuff that needs to happen from this particular actor. And then last but not least, what is the deliverable, the work that we need to do that contributes to the impact that we want to make and ultimately towards the goal that we want to achieve. And funny enough, I've learned myself that this is a kind of a hard thing to do, because often we start at the end. Often we start with articulating the deliverable, because that's the most tangible thing, and all the others are a little harder. Then instruments like Lean Startup or design sprints, they start helping us to articulate and hypothesis the value that we want to achieve and help us to articulate how do we measure it. I honestly believe that if you're covering a multitude of teams and you want to achieve business goals, a super simple instrument like impact mapping is useful to start plotting out who is involved and what needs to happen. And I would love to give you the challenge to truly think about, how do I measure the goal? What is success? How does success look like? I also understand that in many of the teams of our customers, for example, it is really hard to make something measurable. Because what if your application stack exists out of 15 applications and you're just contributing a little element there? But by not discussing, you at least don't get clarity. And I've learned from our customers and from my own career that by expressing and having the conversation about what is it that we want to achieve, doors will open up and you will start to understand how your work is contributing in the bigger picture. And remember the first slide with the circles where we start talking about value being articulated, cascading down, value definition, and value delivery rolling up towards the top. This instrument will help you tomorrow to start understanding it. And then, and we're still talking about automation and DevOps, then all the activities that we're doing is helpful ultimately to get insights on how we are progressing, both on a process level as well as on a goal level. And let me explain that in a bit more detail. If we move from impact, what is it that we want to achieve as an organization, to the outcomes, how can we measure what we want to achieve, to the output, the work that is happening, the data points that are generated by all of our monitoring tools and DevOps tools, how can we bring these together to truly start understanding what we want to achieve? And what we can do today in many organizations is using the data, all the purple ones at the bottom, using the data to see how we are progressing in our execution, make better decisions on where to go faster, and at the same time use that data to optimize the DevOps value stream or the delivery process, if you like. That's the first set. So that data is useful to understand how we are progressing from an execution perspective. That data, however, is not helping us to understand how we are progressing from a value achievement or from a goal achievement perspective, right? Because adding a new feature in production is not equal to a feature that is utilized by the number of customers that we had set up front. So the bottom, the purple ones, are helping us to articulate how far off are we from delivering the feature. Whereas I believe we need to start understanding how do we measure the true outcome, the change in customer behavior. How can we use, for example, observability tools that feed in this data, or simple demand generation data or Google Analytics data? What are the data sources that you can bring together to understand if indeed the goal that we want to achieve is really achieved? Just keeping an eye on the time as well. And by bringing these two together, in the first place, articulating what you want to achieve, and then building a system that starts measuring what you want to achieve, I do believe is a perfect combination to go beyond the automation and really start tracking the customer impact. Are the goals that I've set up front indeed achieved with the processes, the mechanisms, and the technology that I today have in place? Or are there gaps, right? And then you go back to your Explorer map. Remember, you articulate a goal and you start improving, right? That's how the two instruments relate to each other. An Explorer map is there to plan out the change in process, technology, and people. And then an impact mapping technique or really strong backlog management, including hypothesis, is there to measure and track the value. And then to close off, just 3 tips to get you started, right? Because it is a lot of information. There are many instruments that you can use on a day-to-day basis. And I do believe that planning it out super structured is really important. But where do you need to start? 3 simple tips. The first one is, how can we extend our view post-deployment? Because we talk about DevOps, but often it's still focused on dev. What are all the type of bottlenecks that we need to tackle? And that goes beyond bugs and all the other types of obvious waste. And last but not least, how can we use the 2 instruments to start guiding your company at the highest level? What I've learned myself as well is that a pipeline, well, will finish with the deployment to production, but a delivery doesn't stop there. Remember that we've talked about starting to measure usage, taking data from production to articulate whether or not we've achieved our goal. A traditional DevOps pipeline will answer that question by saying, yes, we've achieved our goal, the feature is deployed, I can close my tickets, and therefore I'm done. But if you think about it from the change that we want to measure in customer behavior, it doesn't stop, because the release or the delivery goes on all the way, or probably even beyond, but all the way until the next version of that application is deployed to production. So the question is, how can you use, for example, user telemetry or vulnerability data to start building a feedback loop from the live system back into the backlog? And that is in particular important, because if you don't do so, you're so narrow focused on feature delivery and not that much in testing out whether or not the capabilities that you've developed make an impact in production. And the example I'm calling out here is probably, well, what you can call a kind of a negative example, right? Because you can articulate goals on secure applications and then feeding the security data, vulnerability data back into product management is really important. But you can do exactly the same with user telemetry data, demand generation data, Salesforce data. What is the exact data that I want to feed back into? And when do I call a particular cycle as closed? Why is that important? Because we're moving to shorter and shorter release cycles. Many teams are at the point that they can release on a bi-weekly basis or even on a daily basis or multiple times a day. So how do we start connecting the transactional data from production back into our system? By thinking about the post-deployment era, you can start getting a much better understanding and start building this out. The second important element here, what I do believe, is if you want to accelerate, you need to start understanding where the bottlenecks are. And some of the bottlenecks are super obvious. But I do know that there's a lot of waste just all around in the organization. And why is that important? It is important because it can be an extremely helpful instrument to start planning your digital transformation. What are the improvements that you want to list the goals in your Explorer map? I'm just giving here 4 examples that can be useful to identify the waste. And what I noticed myself in the last few months by working from home predominantly, there is a lot of agenda craziness. I don't know what about you, but my days are sometimes empty and other days they're so fully packed and you're just zooming or teaming all day long. What I've learned is that taking a look at it and really start articulating goals of meetings and therefore shortening, removing, combining them can be helpful to free up time. So taking a look at how you're managing your time as an individual, as a team, and as a business line can be helpful to accelerate. Other elements, the pipeline, the backlog, where is the waste? You know, how many feature requests are just waiting to be picked up but will never be picked up because the customers asked, but we don't have time. Be open and honest. Close them. This is helpful to manage expectations, but at the same time, it is lightening up the burden that is on you. And that will be helpful because you can now start focusing on what brings the most value. Sometimes it will be a feature request, and other times it will be new innovation. And then the last one, which is one I really love, is the delivery bumpiness. I can imagine that there are still many deliveries going on that are a little bumpy. If many applications need to come together at a particular time, because the application stack is still pretty complex, how do you handle this? And how do you make sure that the delivery becomes smoother and smoother? I believe by building a structured setup where pipelines come together, where they can wait on each other, that can be a really powerful way to get this burden down. But remember, what is important to manage transformation is to become aware of all the waste that is around in your organization. And sometimes it's really visible in the IT landscape. What I've also learned is that, for example, the entire budgeting cycle, the yearly budgeting cycle, which seems to be mandatory and which seems to be really, really important, can be a big burden on your managers or on your teams. Because how can they predict whatever needs to happen next year in December if it's still October? That is almost impossible. But think about the impact it has. It is not freeing up people time and mind to spend time on the value creation. But what about risk? How do you stay in control from a risk perspective? I also do believe that you need to transform this. And all these elements together are vital, ultimately, I said it already 3 times, to free up time to start focusing on the value creation. And if you found a mechanism to start tying the value creation and the transformation together, I do believe you can truly, truly start accelerating whatever you want to achieve. So that's why I want to close. The 2 instruments together, impact mapping, as well as the Explorer maps, I believe are a really powerful cocktail to make your digital transformation go faster. The Explorer maps are important to position all the goals that you want to take. Oh yeah, by the way, a lesson there, what I've learned, never, ever, ever focus on more than 3 goals at the same time. One big goal, but the next goals never, ever more than 3. Why? Because you're losing the focus. Because there's simply too much work in progress at the same time. That's one. And the other one, what is really important there, it's not only about too much work in progress. It is also because it becomes harder for people to understand to what goal they're contributing. To make it simple, share that with everyone involved will be useful to achieve the big goal. So that's managing the transformation, and the other side is the impact mapping. All the work that is happening, start relating it back into the goals that you want to achieve as an organization. And if there's floating features that don't have a strategic theme or a true objective that you want to achieve, you might ask yourself the question, is this valuable? And a lot of tech debt is valuable for the long term. But having just floating features or capability without a clear purpose, you might ask yourself the question, is this the right thing to do? Because these are my objectives and my goals. And by focusing on managing the transformation and planning out the work, articulating the value, if you start using these 2 instruments, I'm absolutely certain that your digital transformation will accelerate, and therefore you will have the ability to push out more value for your customers. And with that, I do want to close and give a lot of room and time for some questions and hopefully some answers.
All right, great. Well, we have gotten some great questions in so far, but there is plenty of time. If you have a question for Andreas, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. Let's just dive right into what we've got here so far. Here's the first one for you. When you talked about strategic planning in your Explorer maps, how do you define when a goal is done?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the easy answer is it depends. And that's also the right answer, because it truly depends on the goal that you've articulated. Some of the goals, for example, getting your operational risk in control, is a really measurable goal because you can articulate through measurements, right? If it drops below a particular threshold, then I'm in control. So you can measure the goal and then you can say, I've achieved the goal. The other one, for example, if you talk about more the soft side of the transformation, talking about the atmosphere or the team spirit, it is much harder to truly measure it and to articulate a metric. But I've learned that by having the conversation and, for example, asking the question, but how would it look like? What would be the smell of the place if we've gone through this transformation? You can articulate a kind of a, well, half measurable metric. And then if you've articulated how it would look like and how it would feel, that is often useful if it's more the soft side. The other one that I want to share here, which comes to my mind, what is really important is sometimes you will learn with these Explorer maps that goals and metrics that you have attached to a goal will never ever become reality. Why is that the case? Because if you start thinking in this pattern, you need to learn how to articulate and how to understand how to measure it. And that is important. And that's also kind of the continuous learning and feedback that you will have on an instrument like this. And that's okay. If you don't make your goal in a quarter or in a few weeks, so be it. Let's use it as a learning and let's articulate a better specified goal in the next round.
All right, great. Next question. Let's see. Okay, here's one. When using an Obeya, what is one of the biggest obstacles you need to overcome?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I do think in today's world, there are kind of two obstacles, right? The first obstacle, us no longer being physically together. What are the instruments that provide me the data and how can I bring the data together? I do know that many of the tools that are out there provide pieces of the puzzle. So that is a first obstacle. Think about where does your data come from? In a physical room, it's kind of easier because you just put a few big monitors on the wall and you pull the dashboards on it. The other one, what I do believe is a obstacle to overcome, is purely a personal soft side issue, and that's the discipline. I've learned that it's easy to set up, it's super exciting. Oh, we're going to use data to make decisions and we really are on top of it. But what is important, if urgent issues come in, is that you still free up that 9 o'clock meeting to come together as a leadership team on a day-to-day basis and start talking about the digital transformation. So discipline is hard for everyone, no matter if you're in an engineering team, in a management team, or whatever. Being disciplined to go through on a day-to-day, weekly, quarterly basis is really important to make it work for you.
I would imagine during these times of the pandemic and everybody's working from home, it becomes even more critical too. So,
yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
next question. Yeah, so next question here. Okay, so you touched on alignment from vision and goals toward team execution. How long does this normally take before this works really well? And are there tools or practices to support this?
Yeah, again, I didn't mention the timeline with the Explorer map. What I've learned with planning out the transformation itself, that takes at least 3 quarters, 3 full cycles to start getting used to planning out the digital transformation. Going towards a value articulation from project plans once every 3 years to quarterly vision sessions also takes around, I do believe, at least 3 quarters, because the first one is the initial setup. The second one is, yeah, we're getting used to it. And then the third one is you're using the learnings from the first to start building a kind of a, well, not mature, but a structure that is useful. So that takes a little while. The other thing, what is important there as well, it also a little bit depends on the type of company and the type of software or services that you're offering towards your customers. Because if the majority of your software is extremely customer facing and you have an easy access to this data, it will go much quicker and much faster because you have continuous feedback. If you're more in a large insurance company, a large bank where the cycles are a little longer lasting, it will also be a little longer before you've practiced this. So I would say at least 3/4 of a year. And then the other question is, are there instruments? Yeah, I absolutely do believe that, for example, planning tools beyond backlog planning, but really taking strategic themes, epics all together and start to understanding how it cascades down is really useful for the teams because they can easily go up, understand where their work is contributing to, and the business line manager, the product managers, they can easily drill down and understand almost at the ticket level how the work is contributing. However, this is not how many people start the digital transformation. They often start at the team level without truly building a kind of the levels above. So that takes some effort, but hey, that's useful in your Explorer maps to define as a next goal to start building that alignment. I hope that answers the question.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. All right, so doing a quick time check, we're about 14 minutes to the top of the hour. Still plenty of time for questions. So if you guys have one, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. And we'll just keep plugging right along on these. Here's the next one. Are you able to provide a real use case for DevOps as a service, such as a real example from your experience of how you have scaled up DevOps practices?
Yeah, so I do have many examples, but they all boil down more or less to the same practice. What we see, one of our customers, ABN AMRO, here in the Netherlands, they use, and I'm sorry if it's a little advertising, but they use our release orchestration software. And what they've said, they've built a standard template, a standard pipeline execution pattern that is applicable per technology, right? So the Java, the .NET, and all the others, they have their own pipeline templates, and each Java development team, each .NET team needs to go or will go and utilize that particular template and run release after release out to production. And why did they choose for that particular pattern? They learned that per technology stack, you have specific builds, specific tests, specific security tools that are the most suitable for a technology. So that was for them a kind of a balance between, on one hand, control and standardization, and at the same time, hey, the best of technology for each and every stack. That is one example. The other example, which I do think is really, well, kind of almost obvious, is how do you deal with your roles and permissions using a deployment server where everyone has access to set up what he wants to deploy, right? Modeling it out, whereas the server takes over the how as well as executing the deployment is a perfect way to standardize the deployment patterns, but also at the same time provide tremendous control and a kind of separation of concerns, segregation of duties to really do this. Another one, what I do believe where many teams can standardize is how do you deal with data collection for auditing purposes. If you provide it in a standardized manner to all of your teams, this can be of great help because the teams can focus on the development and not that much bother about, hey, how do you need to harvest the data to provide it to my auditor or my security department. So these are three tangible examples that we see at our customers and that are used in real life.
All right, great. Good stuff, man. Okay, next question. What are some of the metrics that are good to measure for DevOps transformation in a multi-source environment?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question. And my answer again is it depends. What I've learned is that depending on where you are in growing your maturity or being in the transformation, let's call it like this, your metrics will change. What we've seen, what I've experienced myself, it often starts with the kind of the foundational practices. I don't want to call it the simple practices, the foundations of DevOps. And if you want to know more, I can recommend to read the State of DevOps report from Dora. There's a nice little table somewhere 2/3 in, which is describing all the practices. And what you will see in there in that little table is it compares low performers with elite performers. And if you take a look where the elite performance are really well positioned, these are the practices I can recommend you start focusing on first. And then instruments and practices like using or setting up observability instruments, using that data to improve the application, but also to feed back into your decision making. I would say that's a kind of a next generation of metrics that you can start using and you can start collecting. That's on the truly measurable side. The other one is about the more practices and process side of the house, where in the beginning of your journey, you can pretty much focus on the practice of Scrum and measuring whether or not people do all the artifacts of Scrum. Over time, I do believe it's much more about the alignment. How does the work go from the top to the bottom? And is all your work grouped and organized in a manner, in a setup like this? So also in that, well, that journey, you will see a slow change in what you need to measure. But it's a good question, and probably the most generic, non-specific answer is talk about it. Talk about what matters to you and how would it become visible. And I do believe that that will drive a lot of the decisions that you need to make.
All right, great. Okay, I think we have time for 2, maybe 3 more questions. Here's a good one. When using Explorer maps and chasing big goals, how is the continuous calibration to the big goals happening using the Explorer maps?
Yeah, that is also a really good question. And I can promise you, in the first iterations, it wasn't, right? So it is so hard to, the first discovery that we did ourselves, it's so hard to articulate a big goal, but then build next goals that are in alignment with it, right? So it's almost a kind of a scatter plot of things you want to achieve without clear alignment. So that is what will happen in the first run. And then you will notice, yeah, I finished my goal, my next goal, my first goal, but it didn't bring me closer to the big goal, right? So that is a first trick. What we've learned is ask the question, how does it look like? And that is a kind of a weird and simple question at the same time. You can even ask yourself the question, or the team, close your eyes. How does it look like in a year from now? How will it smell? What is the vibe? And that will be helpful to understand if the goal that you just wrote down is indeed bringing you towards the big goal that you want to achieve. That's second. And then the third one is after achieving, right? Imagine you have a big goal and then a series of next goals. After achieving your first goal, take a weekly or a monthly calibration towards the big goal, right? And probably you can remove one or add a new one. That's not a problem, right? Don't let it be put on the wall for 3 months, kind of as it is, but make it dynamic and have that conversation. Good question, by the way. And
yeah,
start using it, and then you will learn it. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, let's see. Next question here is another good one. When we say digital transformation, does this also mean we are moving our organization from what we are doing today to transform and scale, like moving from traditional software usage to open source and horizontal scaling platforms?
Yeah. I did not talk too much about what I would articulate as a digital transformation, because the topics that are mentioned in the question are two perfect topics or goals from a digital transformation, right? So what I've seen is that companies who often start, they purely focus on development and delivery practices and a little bit of process and collaboration practices. But then they start realizing, if I want to move, for example, in the AI and ML space, I can do 2 things. I can put my best people on building a platform, or I can put my best people on utilizing a platform and enhancing it for their own purpose. What I'm saying there is, throughout that journey, you will notice what is more important in your digital transformation. And then there's an entirely different side of the digital transformation, which to me is included, is what about your customer fulfillment process? Imagine, right, you want to have a new subscription for whatever, a new phone subscription, right? How does the process look like in the backend to provide you with a new subscription? These days, I guarantee It's 99% automated. A few years ago, it was still a semi-manual automated process. To me, optimizing this flow, it can be part of a digital transformation to, well, to accelerate the value creation for your customer. So to me, digital transformation is really big, but being super specific about the goals you want to achieve with the entire company, I believe is really useful to get stuff started.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so we're 5 minutes to the top of the hour. I'm going to do one more question, then we'll close it out.
You said 2. This is 3.
Well, I can stop now, but I think the
No,
audience would really appreciate one more question. Okay, what sort of in-house competence, I'm sorry, is needed to work with a partner for digital transformation?
Yeah. Well, again, it depends.
Mhm.
Just from the top of my mind, I would say there are multiple sides of partners. So I don't know exactly where the question is hinting towards, but there's one side which is a partner that can help you as a coach, as a firm that helps you leading the transformation, right? So whether or not it's at team level or management level or executive level, really guiding and coaching you on how to build the instruments, how to go step by step, right? So that is absolutely something where in the first place you can use coaching and a third party to help you through this. What I also know that many organizations do have suppliers, right, that are delivering commercial off-the-shelf applications, which is often a kind of a difficulty in the beginning to start thinking about continuous delivery, right, because they deliver once a quarter. So what I've seen in many situations is that by investing in the partner relationship, you can start almost building a stretched pipeline from the supplier into your organization. So things like early betas, early alphas can be extremely helpful to start validating. So that's another level of partnership. And then the last one is if you talk about outsourcing, for example, engineering or security practices, and these kind of things. I believe you need to take that type of partner also into your digital transformation, because ultimately the speed will only be achieved and the quality and the value creation if you combine the entire pipeline and the entire set of practices and the entire set of technologies. Remember the first slide with the circles. So if you have this type of development, hey, start collaborating. What I promise you is that the entire contract negotiation will need to be changed as well, because you need to start measuring other elements rather than simply the delivery or the amount of lines of code or stories that are delivered.
All right. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes left, so we do need to close out the question and answer period. I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. There were so many good ones. If we didn't get your question answered, please know that Andreas is getting a copy of all of the questions that came in. So I'm sure he or somebody from Digital.ai will be more than happy to follow up with you to get your question answered. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following the webinar today, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the Devops.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to Devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay, before we close things out, I did want to do the drawing for the 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's announce today's lucky winners. Our first winner is, let's see, Cliff N. Congratulations, Cliff. Second winner today is Mary M. Congratulations, Mary. Third winner today is Robert G. Congratulations, Robert. And our final winner today is Wayne R. Congratulations, Wayne. Guys, check your inboxes. That's where the $25 Amazon gift card will be coming your way. So if you don't see it there, then check your spam folder. Andreas, thanks so much for a great presentation. As always, lots of fun, lots of great information, and lots of great questions from the audience too. So I know they got a lot out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and good questions.
Yes, yes. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. And I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. But for now, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.